So John asked me to provide a stakeholder response, and just to say I'm a member of the steering group, so I'm one of those stakeholders that John was mentioning there, just to put my cards on the table, as they say. And I'm also lead one of the other projects funded by the Met Office under this programme, AquaCat, and I'm part of the OpenClim framework that's hopefully going to be taking some of this work forward. But I thought I'd quickly start with, in terms of a stakeholder response, what is my perspective that I'm acting as a stakeholder? Well, it's a flood bias. So I come from a flood bias perspective, if you like, one that we focus on long-term issues, changing flood risks over time, investment in adaptation over time. We're also bringing a perspective of fair outcomes. So we're interested not just in sort of economic features, but also social disadvantaged features that some of the projections can help us with. And we're also interested in a strategic perspective. So using this information in a large scale, long-term type way. And we recently completed the flood projections for the climate change risk assessment. So when you see these following slides, that's where I'm coming from, if you like, as a stakeholder. And we basically use the same framework under most of the work we look at, which are the components of risk that we all are familiar with, hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and the drivers of change, of climate change, socioeconomic, and adaptation. And if I thought I'd just highlight the normal link that's made just between socioeconomic and exposure. That's kind of the core link that we would make. And using some of John's earlier projections that he did for the CCRA, we took that information and rolled it into the climate change risk assessment. But that was at a local authority. Now I put this graph up to just show that the socioeconomic projections, in this case population, is really quite different. So it's not a small influence on that future risk. It is really quite different. So on the left there was our low growth projection that we used for the CCRA, and on the right the high growth. So as I say, it's quite a strong aspect of looking at the future of future risk. And this is another one of the plots that we put into the CCRA report that tries to disaggregate the influence of climate change. So the greys are present day risks, the light blue are under a 2-degree future, and a dark blue under a 4-degree future. But if I look at the influence of population growth, which is this little bar here, that difference between a low population growth future and a high population growth future is really strongly illustrated. That if we assume no adaptation by through to the 2080s, then low population adds a little bit, just that part of the low population, excluding the climate influences, it just adds around about 364 million to expected annual damages. But under a high growth future, high population growth future, we've seen adding almost 2.4 billion to that expected annual damage. So it's a really strong feature. So anything that we can get that's better on those projections is really very welcome. So that's kind of the driver why we were interested in being involved in the steering group, but why we're excited about what's coming out, where better resolution is for sure a key aspect, but I would say it's a credible resolution. So in the CCRA 3, we have the local authorities, but we have to still make pretty crude translations between that local authority projection and a local development, where development happens within that local authority. So we were doing that internally as part of the CCRA 3, but Cambridge here have done much more work on trying to think through that, how those are spatially refined. But I would also say one of the things we've been mentioning in the project is it avoids what I've called here an incredible resolution, because lots of developments recognise that, or actually take place in combination with adaptation choices as well. And as you progressively get more detailed, there's a high link between my adaptation choice and where the development takes place. So if you choose to build on the floodplain, or if you choose to, the way you choose to do it. And I think, broadly speaking, the projections that Jon is working on here tries to strike that balance, that it doesn't try and do all of the adaptation choices, but it gives a much more higher resolution information that we can then take forward into our work. We're also, I would say, I'm really keen on the fact that it's more than just population in a usable way. So demography and income are in there. So that helps us, or will help us even further understand that social vulnerability, and which is obviously a core aspect of a fair approach to adaptation. In the climate change risk assessment, we use this thing called a neighbourhood flood vulnerability index that talks about, that has issues of age and physical mobility and all of these features that we will have very broad information in the CCRA 3, but with Jon's projections, we will have much better information on that. And on the right there is some work that we did for FRE that uses income to try and say households without insurance. Well, that was really broadly based, where again, Jon's projections of those other things to just population will help us understand that the changing patterns of risk and changing access to insurance much more clearly. We also like the idea that the projections aren't flood specific policies. They don't embed those, but they are embedded in a broader policy framework. So we can understand how to think about flood policies that are consistent with those broader SSPs. So we like that idea that it's got a range of those associated with it, and we can use those to try and frame coherent flood policies that link to those. And just as a final wrap-up slide, well, we are very much looking forward to getting hold of the data. As Jon said, it's going to be open, which is great. So we'll be looking to use those. And what I'm really interested in seeing is how those new projections change our understanding of the profile of risk, both the spatial distribution and who and where, who's at risk. And then I wonder if they will be sufficiently influential, and I think they will be, to change our understanding of how best to invest in flood risk management priorities. And I think we will see a difference in those. And then, as Jason mentioned at the start, we're hoping to take these forward into OpenClim and the future CCRA 4. So I think it's great, is my basic response from a stakeholder perspective, that getting that kind of resolution across all of those SSPs is, and a much richer set of changes is going to support a much greater understanding of our future flood risks. And there's my contact. Okay, that was my 10-minute response. So hopefully that was useful. Back to you, Jon.